elected one, like as in last fall, and then 3 get elected sort of in the off years. So that's how it sets up. I'm actually going to turn this over to Megan to kick us off. And the last thing I'm going to say is I am hoping for a seamless driving experience here in Zoom. I understand it just did some updates. We're all scrambling to adjust, so bear with us, and we're going to try to make it so you forgot exactly what I said in like 2 minutes, but just in case. So thanks, and yeah, I hope you learn a lot about our city and how each council puts together priorities that really work for our community in real time. Go ahead, Megan.
Good morning / afternoon, everyone. I'm Megan Perkins, and I am a new counselor on the Bend City Council. And we wanted to start today by sort of talking a little bit about what our city does, what our city doesn't do. Some of these things are probably pretty obvious to you, and some maybe you'll learn something new. I know that I learn new things about our city every day. So some of the things that we always think about with the city are, fire and rescue, and our police force as well. Things like our water, our sewer, our streets, but also, the city is creating policy every day. We're writing laws and codes that govern this city. Now, we also do a lot of other things too. Many of you may know, may not know that we have the 3rd busiest airport in the state, and that is the Bend Airport. Things like community development, planning, building permits. We have a very active affordable housing department with the city. We also have a very active group of neighborhood associations. In every neighborhood of our city, there is a neighborhood association that is there to represent you and your wishes. Those neighborhood associations go through a process called the Neighborhood Leadership Association, which is in constant contact with our city. We also work on economic development. We have an economic development department, accessibility, volunteerism. There's a lot of things that the city does. So the next slide talks about, here is what we don't do. And here's where a lot of the time there is some confusion. We don't do parks. These are separate tax districts. The Bend Parks and Recreation District. There is the library, and anything involving the jail or the 911, elections. Those are all through the county. Something that I think gets confused a lot. Our social services, public health. That is a county thing. We are not service providers. We do not do public health with the city. Schools are obviously a separate district, and garbage. Those are all things that we don't do as a city.
Thanks, Megan. So let's talk about how the city council frames up its 2-year goals. This is our current council. It turns over every 2 years often, as I just explained. So these are the people that are working for you. Our council is 7 volunteers. We earn somewhere between, or what lands in our checking accounts every month is somewhere between $500 and $830, depending on whether or not you're a councilor or a mayor. And who was Bend's first mayor? I didn't know. It was A.E. Goodwillie, who was elected on January 4th, 1905. Another question that I get asked a lot is, so how many women have been the mayor of Bend? Well, I am the 3rd mayor of Bend, and I am the first mayor ever to be elected who was a woman. So a little background. So let's talk about goal setting and sort of the timeline, and this gives you an idea of kind of how the process goes. So people get elected in November. This year it was, or last year it was November 2020. We look for council and inputs from November to January. And the city also does a fair amount of polling every couple of years too. So we can get sort of non-biased, statistically relevant, consistent information over time to help inform and identify trends as well as emerging needs. New counselors were sworn in January 2021. And then we began work on identifying our two-year goals, put together a work plan, funding to match those goals. And we sat down in May with a citizens group that was the same size as council, people with really strong financial background, to help look through the budget with knowledge and ask hard questions. That all came together with the adoption in June of this year, 2021. So again, this was Megan's slide. I sort of took some pieces from it. So Megan, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, no problem. I think the important thing about goal setting to know is that, the goals that council developed did not, the decisions were not made in a vacuum. You can see here, there were so many different ways for people to provide input. And in fact, often, we were soliciting input from organizations, from people in order to kind of engage the community in this process and to come up with goals that really do represent the goals of our city. So here are just a few sort of ways that we heard from people as we were going through this process. Anything from the traditional things that you think about, where people email council or provide public comments at meetings. Also, Sally mentioned there was a community survey that was put out, as well as one on policing. We also had a listening session with community groups where they were able to, and neighborhood associations, and where they were able to, talk to us about what they would like to see in the goals and what their priorities were. There was also a lot of input from sort of the city's developing DEI plans for the last couple of years that we took in as well. So this is just an example of all of the different boards and committees and commissions that exist right now in the city of Bend, and all of these are advising council and providing assistance, providing input to us at all times. I mentioned the neighborhood associations earlier and the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance and sort of how that comes into the city. There's also 3 city manager advisory committees as well. And a couple of these are pretty new to the city. The Human Rights and Equity Commission is just a few months old. The Transportation Bond Committee is just a few months old. And the ECC is pretty new as well. So one of the things that Sally and I were talking about before this is, the process of goal setting is messy. So this is why it's a messy slide. It's messy hearing from people from all over the city. It's messy when you take 7 people with ideas of what their goals should be for their ideas of goals for the city and combine them into one. So we went through sort of a 2-day planning process, and this is what came out of it. We added an environment a category all on its own, really wanting to prioritize that for our city. And we added a housing category all on its own. And I don't think I have to explain to you why it's important for housing to have its own set of goals. As was mentioned in the introduction, it's the thing we hear about every single day as counselors. It's the thing that we are most concerned and most worried about as counselors. So this is sort of where our goals started to kind of come into play during the goal setting process.
So we worked on them and it looked like this. And then it looked like this. We cleaned it up. And you can find this if you just Google City of Bend goals. And what people will find is not only a dashboard from the last biennium, which just concluded on June 30th. But we will begin to track all of these goals, also associated with the budget, as we now move into this biennium, which just began on July 1st of this year. So we thought we'd sort of highlight a few recent actions and accomplishments which have been of interest to our greater community.
The first thing is, our housing goal is, it's stated there below, take meaningful action to make this statement a reality. People who live and work in Bend can afford housing in Bend. One of the things that this also, needs to address is our unhoused community. And we were very excited and grateful to receive almost $3 million for state funding for something called Project Turnkey. And the idea behind Project Turnkey is turning motels and hotels into transitional shelters. And so because of that money, we were able to purchase a property on Division Street, and we are currently remodeling it for use as a transitional shelter. And one of the things that I get asked a lot is, what does that mean? What does a transitional shelter mean? The idea behind this is for people who are really just needing a place to be for a little while, maybe 30 days, maybe 60 days, maybe 90 days. They need to be able to unpack their things. They need to be able to cook food for themselves and work with the staff that is going to be managing the shelter, and work on finding more permanent housing, and also be provided the social services that they need to get back on their feet. So it's not as a shelter that people are coming in and out of every day. This is sort of that middle of the road approach. So we were really, really excited to be opening it hopefully by the end of this year.
Really important project. Another project that we're focusing on right now is the first transportation general obligation bond project, or GO project, we call it. Our transportation bond oversight committee, which was one of the requirements in the bond that the voters voted on, has been meeting for quite a bit now. And this was identified as their first top priority. I have to say, I'm personally was really thrilled to see this project move forward. I know that it's a really important east-west corridor, that it was in desperate need of some improvements, and the communities that live along that corridor too didn't have sidewalks. It was really sort of part of the old county infrastructure that needed some attention. So and one of the reasons I also bring this forward today is there is currently a virtual community open house going on. So again, if you went out and Googled the Wilson Avenue corridor in Bend, you would be able to participate in this community open house right now. That's through August 27th. So you still have a little time. Again, this is what we do as a city, right? We bring projects forward, and even at this time in COVID, we really want to engage community as much as we can and get your feedback and ideas too. And we've gotten quite a few ideas. We also have seen a lot of emails in our inboxes as counselors on this project. Let me go forward to the next place. And I'm going to give this to Megan.
Yeah, so as we all know, we had a pretty scary heat wave reach our area, and it's continued to be very hot this summer, which really concerned us as a city on sort of two levels. One is for our unhoused community, people that are literally living on the streets in 110-degree temperatures, and also the risk for the wildfire risk that was from very hot and dry climate. We heard from so many of our constituents on this, and we're able to declare a local state of emergency, which really helped mobilize resources to help support the unhoused community with things like misters and water, for those that are living on the streets, and allowed cooling shelters to be open during the day for the hottest parts of the day. And then we also banned the use of all fireworks. We extended that state of emergency through August 31st. And last night at our council meeting, we ratified the emergency order through December 1st. You know, our concerns are to preserve public safety and to really mitigate that fire risk. And later on in the fall, we'll be having a work session and really talking through a potential permanent prohibition of fireworks. Personal fireworks, I should say, not the big shows that you see, you know, on Pilot Butte.
That's right. Public fireworks that are approved by the state fire marshal, as well as the City of Bend Fire and Rescue, will continue to take place. So one of the questions we get asked a lot is, how do we pay for things? So instead of talking you through this, which can be pretty dry, we're going to share a little YouTube with you. So if you'll bear with me while I stop sharing and reshare, if you could stand by for a sec. Okay, here we go.
As a resident of Bend, you pay taxes and fees. The city uses those dollars responsibly to provide all the core services you need to live your life: streets, public safety, water, sewer, and more. When you pay property taxes, about 21% of your property tax payment goes to the city. The rest goes to other organizations, including Bend LaPine Schools, Deschutes County, the Bend Park and Recreation District, and so on. The city's general fund is mostly made up of property taxes. A few other sources of income for the general fund include room taxes or lodging taxes, and franchise fees that companies pay to use the public right-of-way to provide other necessary community services. Only about 30% of the total revenues that the city receives go into the general fund. The other approximately 70% of the total revenues that the city receives are what we call restricted funds. These restricted funds are for fee-supported services. For example, the city can't use water fees to pay for fire trucks or police officers. The fees you pay for water can only be used for water-related expenses. The general fund, on the other hand, is made up of discretionary funds, which have more flexibility. Every 2 years, following a council election, the city council, who are elected policymakers, develops goals that determine how discretionary funds should be prioritized in the biennial budget. Typically, about 75% of the general fund pays for public safety, police and fire services. Other core services supported by the general fund include street maintenance, transit, accessibility, and some community development expenses. Visit bendoregon.gov/news and bendoregon.gov/council to stay up to date on the issues that council will be discussing, and be sure to attend city council meetings every first and third Wednesday of the month, where you can voice your opinions and concerns directly to city council. For more information on the city's budget, visit bendoregon.gov/budget.
There you go. So because you got such a good primer there from the video, we're going to move quickly through these next few slides. So Megan, anything else to add here?
Yeah, I mean, this to me was, I mentioned earlier to Sally, was the most helpful visual when I was sort of studying up on the city. It really does show you sort of, you know, where your money goes and all the different sort of taxing districts there are in our area. And, you know, almost 43 cents out of your dollar goes to this Bend LaPine School District because of the school bonds. And about, you know, just to reiterate, about 21 cents out of every dollar goes to our city.
Thanks. Yeah, and again, these are dollars for the biennium. So half of these for every year, roughly. And again, you can see this year in this biennium, rather 69% goes into designated revenues and about 30% goes into the general fund, and most of the large bulk of that goes into our safety, police, and fire. And then the general fund expenditures I think we've pretty much covered that. And then we want to drop in a little bit on just there's some discretionary funds, often more this year than ever, I will say, in the 5 times I've gone through goal setting and budget setting, that the council can really focus and allocate into needs that in special areas that have been identified by all the polling and the work we've done throughout the city. Run through that, Megan?
Yeah, no, just that, I mean, you can see here sort of the as usual, the priority of it, what is it, about 40% is going towards our housing goal. This slide is for most of you probably know, as the counties, states all received ARPA funding, but our city also received ARPA funding. We received about $14 million. 7 of it has already been received, and 7 of it is coming, I believe, next May. We've chosen to utilize 6 of that 14 basically immediately, with, again, a vast majority of it on housing. You can see, through this chart here, I don't have to go through it all in specifics, but we can see we have a huge investment in our housing goal. The other thing that you might want to sort of notice at the top here is the accessible and effective city government. One of the things, as we grow so fast, as we are building homes and communities so fast, one of the things that we wanted to do as a city is to provide more actual city staff in the permitting department, in our communications department, to make sure that people get what they need out of our city. So that's what a lot of that budget adjustment number is as well, under accessible and effective city government. Anything I forgot there, Sally? Or
I think it's I mean, the only thing that I thought was interesting is the dollars that will come to communities like Bend. We got half of them this year, and we won't get the other half for another year. So, and of the dollars that we got, some of them did simply go into reserves, because as we've all discovered this last year and a half, it's really hard to anticipate what's around the corner. And so we need to be ready for anything and everything as much as we can. So just to sort of summarize the budget side, the balanced budget that was approved in June reflects the city's response to the ongoing challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, while maintaining, if not expanding, services offered to the community. It identifies funding to address the city's goals for the upcoming biennium. And the overall biennial budget reflects a 4% increase compared to the revised budget for the 2019-2021 biennium. And what's interesting to me about that is that when we were going into COVID a year ago in May and June, I think all of us thought that the world and our community was heading into a huge recession. So we made significant budget cuts, up to 20%, and really sort of tightened our belt significantly. Obviously, the outcome was different than what we anticipated. So essentially, I think we've shifted around, given the changes and change of needs throughout our community, how we spend funds. We're cautiously optimistic. And again, trying to put resources and services where our community really needs it most right now. The only other thing I'm going to mention right here in terms of taxes, and then I think we're going to move in and open it up to questions. In the 1990s, Measure 5 established limits on Oregon's property taxes on real estate. So what that means is that Measure 47 limited the growth of the property's assessed value to 3% maximum per year. And of course, in times like this, when the property values are increasing really quickly, your property taxes are not going to. But what this also does is it creates a structural challenge which impacts our public safety departments, the police and fire, whose funding comes directly from the property taxes in the general fund. So And that definitely challenges all of us to keep pace with the changing needs of our growing community. And we'll continue to look at ways to address that. But that's just one of the many, many things that we're looking at all the time. Again, so many needs throughout our community in so many different areas. So doing our best to meet them on a regular basis. With that, I'm just going to say, we hear from a lot of people these days is like, gosh, where do I get that information? I didn't know that. What are you doing about this? And there are some great ways to stay connected and informed on what's happening at the city. This e-news, I think, is really useful. You just sign up for the email and you read it when you want it. The city council is on YouTube, as well as, you can reach us through the City of Bend website and our council page, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. There's so many ways to keep up with what's happening at the city on a regular basis. It's a great way for those issues that you really care about, and we are working on them on a daily, if not weekly basis. So for you to stay really up to date and current with what's happening.
So can I just add, Sally,
yes.
One of the things that I think some people don't know is, all of those committees and commissions that I talked about earlier, all of those meetings you are able to access and to listen to, and often to provide public comment at as well. So if there's a specific thing that you're interested in, with the Planning Commission or the Human Rights and Equity Commission, you're able to not only watch, but also to participate in that as well.
Yes, great point. Thank you. So with that, Bill, I'm going to turn this back over to you. I'm going to stop sharing for a second and go back to our goals page, and then I'll reshare and you can do whatever you want with it. All right.
All right. Well, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilor. That gives us a great kind of oversight about the goals. Sally, one of the things that you just mentioned was, and it's something I've heard from city councilors for decades now, and city staff, is that Bend is somehow disadvantaged by Measure 5's 3% annual increase on property tax revenues. But if you look at a inflation index during the same time period, inflation has gone up at a much lower rate than 3%. People on fixed incomes, their cost of living increases, say for Social Security, have gone up far less than 3%. Why is it that the city staff and city elected officials keep raising this 3% cap as though it's somehow constraining us, when in fact your revenues are increasing at a higher rate than folks on fixed incomes that are being taxed?
Can you hear me? I'm still, yeah.
Yes.
Well, I am not an economist, so I will say generally, I think it really depends. If you have people in a neighborhood and someone bought their house in 1930, 1960, 1970, 1980, and the houses are all the same value, they're all going to be paying different tax amounts. And I think for me, that's really what it's about. I mean, it's, does that make sense that, these people in the same neighborhood in the same area whose houses are essentially the same market value, there's, the way the tax system is set up, it doesn't create consistency across the platform.
So it's really more of an equity issue than it is poor city. We don't get enough opportunities to raise our taxes more than 3%.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that happened was that if we look at Parks and Rec, if we look at the city of Redmond, if we look at many cities throughout the state, because through some technical pieces that were written into that measure, Bend was just frozen at a lower tax rate. So per capita,
I think it's because at the time that measure went into effect, Bend had a lower tax rate than, say, Hermiston. But the average house in Hermiston is worth about a quarter of what it is in Bend. And so I think that's why it was taxed at a higher rate there. Anyway, let's move on.
Yes.
This kind of goes back to the whole concept of this forum, at least, which was goal setting. And there are different schools of thought on goal setting. One is to have aspirational goals that are big picture, big audacious goals. And another theory is to set goals that have specific benchmarks that you can measure and find out whether you've in fact met those goals after a couple of years. And these goals, just my own kind of look at it, seem more on the aspirational level. And I'd like to ask, both of you, what sort of benchmarks are there so that you can look back in a year or two and find out how you and how your staff are doing in terms of meeting those goals, to make sure that they're not just platitudes?
Well, I'll start with housing, looking at the goals that were set last time, and then we can talk a little bit about housing again that we see already happening in this biennium. Recognizing when we set goals for the previous council, recognizing the huge focus on housing need, we set what we thought was an audacious goal of 3,000 housing units, including a focus on middle income and 100% area median income and lower, 80, 60, right, and below. And we all thought it was up high in the sky. It was very aspirational when we set that goal. What we have in the pipeline, what we have either built, under construction, or currently in the pipeline right now is 4,000. And a lot of those, and given that goal, there is a huge focus on creating infrastructure or funding and building infrastructure that would allow more multifamily and development in some areas where we knew middle income housing was really important, but the market just couldn't quite get there. So we looked for levers to accomplish that. So we had what looked like to be an audacious goal. We had a number that we wanted to reach. We had a range of area and median income, and we hit it and we really beat it. So that's a really good example. And we've done that. So I'm going to turn this over to Megan, but we're doing that similarly this round.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. I remember during goal setting, there was a couple of times when I think I thought I saw our city manager visibly sweating, when we were talking about some of these goals and how, they were going to be achieved from a staff level. But, it's funny, I look at them now and I think, a lot of our goals are aspirational. But if you look at housing, if you look at transportation, how we get around town, if you look at economic growth and shared prosperity, if you look at the safety, of our residents here in Bend, if you look at our climate, if you look at accessible government, all of these are things that shouldn't be aspirational, right? These are things that we should be focusing on and that we should be working on as a city. And so, I feel very confident that it is a good thing to do some dreaming and then to figure out how you're going to get there. And the one thing that I have seen from this city is that they are determined to get there. And I would be very surprised if every single one of our strategies under each of these goals that we have here, these 6 goals, were not met at the end of the biennium.
And the other thing, I'm just out on our City of Bend website and pulling it up right now. I managed to not bring my print out, sort of all the goals. So we actually drilled way down. So anybody who wants to see the detail that's behind each one of these very high level goals here, they can see the drill down and the specific actions that we want to see. And we were just refining that in July and August, as well as we were looking additional ARPA funds and other funds that were coming in. We wanted to be really strategic and careful, as well as understand how our goals still really worked. And we're getting specifically to the needs that we have. Again, there's so much is changing in real time, and opportunities are coming forward too in real time that we didn't see even 4 months ago during our goal settings.
question. Do you see these goals as goals of the city council by which you will manage yourselves, or perhaps even the voters will manage you? Or do you see these goals as goals that you're setting for the city staff by which you're going to be managing city staff?
Well, we are elected. I mean, it's like any elected body. We are electeds. We, our goal, our job is to reflect the values of the community and identify the needs of the community and to set policy and to give direction to staff to implement it. I think that's pretty clear. And so we give direction to the staff and they implement. Obviously, they are the professionals. We are the electeds. They're trained. They have, we have a really well-educated, hugely committed staff. That became really clear during COVID. Work very, very hard for the community. And we demand a lot of them because the community demands a lot of us as a council. What else would you like to know? Okay.
That's, oh, go ahead, Megan.
Oh, no, that's, you
Okay.
said it. I mean, that's cool.
So it sounds like it's a little bit of both.
I think so.
I mean, I guess the voters ultimately get to decide kind of what policy direction they want to go when they elect councilors and a mayor. But this is a policy tool that you use to manage staff. And if staff doesn't measure up, then there are things that you as a council can do. If they do manage, then you can set some new goals and we can make it even better. And I don't mean to sound critical on this. I think it's great that you set goals here. I would rather have you set a goal here and reach here than set your goal here and attain it. And I think that's what we've seen from your council.
Well, I would counter that. I mean, I would look at for instance, the Bend Central District. That was aspirational. It looked like nothing was going to happen. We had a lot of people that thought even with a tax increment financing district that was implemented, no one was going to be interested in developing it. Somebody had a wild hair idea to put another east-west connection from Hawthorne connecting Juniper Park to Drake Park, right? I mean, and all of a sudden the community got engaged. They brought a presentation to Ben last night. We've had state legislatures begin to fund, isolate dollars for through the ARPA and transportation funding that, we're beginning work on like 3 different east-west crossings. I mean, I would say we often start here, right? And even if we don't quite make it, and sometimes we don't. But sometimes when you set a really high goal, everybody reaches and stretches and hits it and goes higher. And I think I've seen that happen too.
Well,
It's kind of like, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and that's also, sort of in the budgeting process, that's, what came through to us as well. It's like, okay, well, you said you wanted to do this, then we need to hire someone in this department in order for that, goal to become a reality. So that was the other part of the process for sure.
And it's
Goal
also
setting
constrained too. I mean, like, I want to be really clear. Like, we have limited dollars that we have to work with. So
Yes.
We're trying to be creative, create partnerships with, especially with Deschutes County right now. I'm thinking on a whole host of things, but with Parks and Rec, we just did a joint agreement that had been 2 years in the making in terms of maintenance of trails and transportation corridors throughout our city that all our community members use. So, again, looking for ways for us to create partnerships that really maximize limited funding and resources in our community and being conscious of that.
It sounds like goal setting is not entirely an art and not entirely a science, but a mix of the two. It reminds me of at the start of the pandemic, my goal was to lose 20 pounds and I've only got 30 to go.
Yeah, something like that. Hey, one thing I do want to point out is that I just pulled up on the bendoregon.gov website this draft council goal framework, which was revised This is the one we pretty much stuck with on March 12, 2021. And people can go out there and really begin to see how we drilled down and got specific. So people can write, I'm just looking at wildfire and emergency resiliency plans, acknowledging our changing climate. You know, I was looking at transportation and infrastructure, transportation system plan, you know, housing, invest in programs and partnerships that result in collaborative concrete actions, but then partner with Deschutes County, create an emergency homelessness task force that results in a 5-year community action plan aimed at eliminating homelessness. So there are some goals. There's some concrete actions connected to that aspirational goal.
I think sometimes the city council has been criticized as being the city council of the general fund, while leaving those discretionary funds more to staff. They tend to be a little bit more niche related, a little more specialized, a little more legal constraints, some of those things. And these goals, at least generally, appear to be more focused on the general fund sort of goals, rather than when you get into really a very large part of the city's budget and a very important part, those different discretionary funds. Are these goals addressed at the discretionary, or the, excuse me, at the non-discretionary portions of the budget, as well as the general fund? Water, sewer, roads, those sorts of things?
Well, if I was quick and I could go back to that slide that basically shows what happens to all the dollars in our general fund, you could see that they're not very, ultimately, given our entire budget, they're not that many dollars to play with. So simply by that fact, a lot of these goals then have to affect the direction of what would happen in the water or the sewer as well.
Right.
Well, I
Your
think
hands
also-
are tied to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, I think our accessible and effective city government goal does address a lot of that. I mean, you know, I pay my water bill to the city every month, you know,
Right.
that kind of thing, you know, making sure that the people that work for the city are able to properly, you know, work for the residents of Bend.
So
Right. Let me give you a more concrete example. Let's take when folks stay at restaurants, or excuse me, not at restaurants. When they stay at hotels and motels or overnight accommodations, they pay a transient room tax, and that goes into a fund. And that fund is, to a large extent, non-discretionary. It's got to be used for a couple things that the statute specifies. One of those is tourism marketing, and the other is tourist facilities. But the city government does have some discretion in terms of which of those two goals it spends the money on, facilities or marketing. It also has some discretion as to which kind of marketing it might use. Do you advertise for tourism in Soldier of Fortune magazine, or in a magazine that picks a different demographic? You know, you can market and pick your demographic. Does the city get involved in kind of picking how the city markets itself within that those dollars that are tagged for marketing?
well, I'm gonna start up on the marketing, and then I'm gonna turn to Megan for the facilities. So what I will say is, it's a big question. I'm trying to figure out exactly where to start. But first of all, I want to distinguish between, because a lot of people don't, between Visit Central Oregon and Visit Bend. They are two separate entities with two different marketing strategies per se. And so I want just to be clear that we have no control over Visit Central Oregon at all. We do give direction, and both the Bend Economic Development Advisory Board and the City Council review the Visit Bend plan every year. You look at the general direction, the tone, the focus, and how those dollars are spent.
So let me just interrupt, just to keep it moving. What is the target demographic that the city council is trying to attract for tourism? And understanding that those are the same folks that tend to often move here.
So I would just suggest that you go and look at the Visit Bend marketing plan. I'm not going to be able to pull that out of my back pocket
Sure.
super quickly. Here's what I will say. The city of the Bend City Council and I think the community recognize that the transient room taxes that were collected that were somewhat discretionary did need shifting. So we're fortunate enough to be contracting with a partner who is sensitive to directions from Bend City Council, and the direction of that marketing has changed significantly. We did take some of those dollars, which we could legally put into a rainy day fund. We did that. And we also made one more change recently in terms of taking a lot of those dollars that used to be directed at marketing and shifting them to facilities. So I'm going to let Megan drill down on that a little bit.
Thank you.
The Visit Bend is very aware of sort of the issue with the constraints that are put on the transient room tax and how we can utilize it. And one of the things that the problems that we had in our area was that tourism. What does tourism related facilities actually mean? And we were able to to bring in that definition in order to create the Bend Sustainability Fund. And this is going on right now through Visit Bend, and they predict that roughly $500,000 to maybe $750,000 will be able to put into this sustainability fund. And what I like about the sustainability fund is there's a diverse group of stakeholders and advisors that are going to be making decisions about how these things will be funded. And basically what it means is that these tourism related facilities could be anything from public restrooms downtown to creating a new trail that will help divert traffic from another trail that tourists use. There's just all sorts of ideas of things on Mount Bachelor, and basically the idea is that it benefits us, right? Because the things that tourists like to do, we like to do, right? I like to float the river. I like to go on a hike. I would love for there to be a public bathroom when I am out with my children downtown. And so that was a really unique and creative way to sort of change the definition a little bit about and be able to utilize that money and to put a huge investment. I mean, $500,000 per year will be able to be utilized into these projects, and community groups have already, I think August 1st was the deadline, and we're already able to submit proposals, and we should hear soon about what we're going to be funding this first year of this program. So you can find out more about that. I think it's like, if you go to Visit Bend/Sustainability Fund or something like that, you should be able to find it.
Thank you. I know historically, the tourist facilities and tourist marketing were both options that those funds could be used for under state law, but the city had artificially limited itself from using that money for facilities. And I'm glad to hear that we're being a little more open-minded about that. If I think traffic counts show that 10% of the use of a traffic circle is by tourists, then it would stand to reason that 10% of the cost of that traffic circle be covered by those city gathered transient room tax funds. Moving on though, let's go more a little bit toward the equity issue. I have a question here. Making government more accessible is one of the goals that not only made it into this biennium, but was a major point in the campaigns of the city's newest councilors. More than 6 months in, what has been done to make city government more accessible to more people outside of virtual meeting and participation, which happened in response to COVID?
Do you mind if I start with that, Sally?
Go for it.
Okay. Yes, this was something that I felt very strongly about when I was running. And I would like to just focus a little bit on the virtual side of things, because yes, it was in response to COVID, but I think we've learned a lot because of the whole virtual world that we are working and living in right now. I know that I personally have been able to access more things in this virtual world than I would normally have been able to. Normally, I could not have gone to X luncheon and sat there for, but if I can be picking my kid up at preschool on a Zoom and listening into a meeting, doing those two things at once, it has provided a lot more access. And so I think that as we go forward, should we ever be post-COVID, as we go forward, and I hope that we will, to integrating that into city council meetings, because a lot of the times, our meetings run late. People have kids, people have jobs that, maybe on that same schedule, but being able to call in virtually has provided a lot more opportunity for people to have their say. Some of the things that the city is doing, there are constituent services, new staff positions for constituent services, communications staff that is going to be working with particularly vulnerable communities, translation and interpretation services for many of our meetings and all of the things that we do as sort of a city council. Would I love to be doing more listening sessions? Absolutely. Love to go beyond that 2-minute public comment where we don't respond to people. And what I would love to be doing, traveling city halls and all of that kind of thing. We're still trying to kind of figure out how to do that in the world that we live in right now. There's still a lot of work to be done. And I think we're all aware that we need to continue to be a more accessible city government for everybody in our city.
Before we go on, I just want to make sure we have a chance to address this kind of one last question. We're out of time, but that question is important, and it is, what can the city council, the city government do to make Bend a more diverse population in terms of racial and ethnic and sexual orientation makeup? And how do we make this community friendlier to a wider variety of people?
Well, that's a long answer. Take us a long time.
That could be the source subject of a next forum, I'm sure. But
it's a question. I think it's a question of the moment, right? I mean, so for instance, I think we're working on equity mapping throughout the city right now, right? I mean, based on age, income, all sorts of, right? What does equity mean? And how diverse is our population in terms, right? All different. We tend to focus on some areas of equity when we talk about it, but we have a hugely diverse population in terms of political point of views, in terms of income, in terms of what color their skin is, what their cultural background is, what their gender is, right? There's so many different ways we look, so many lenses we look at. How do we create equity? How do I identify what there is and how to create the changes that we want?
Let me be more specific then, and for lack of time. How do the goals the city council now has specifically incorporate those needs?
I would say, first of all, look at what you see in front of you, right? What is at the center of every single one of our goals? Because I think in past councils, and as we're learning, we're all learning, equity was, and DEI was it was a separate little goal, right? It was a separate thing. But what we're trying to do here and with our goals is talk about how that is infused in absolutely everything that we do in the city. From transportation to what types of housing is available, to equity mapping, to the climate impact on vulnerable communities. It should be at the center of everything that we do. We have a lot of work to do to make this community more welcoming for our diverse populations. Absolutely. But this is an effort and a goal and an ambition of all of us on city council, and something that we believe so strongly in, and are hoping that we can start that work and really start something in the city.
So it's that Jiminy Cricket sitting on your shoulder when you're making virtually every decision that you make as city councilors,
Exactly.
whether it's goal setting or how to set the water rates.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Megan, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to participate in today's program. For those listeners out there, we send out a survey after every forum to get your feedback so we can shape our events in ways that work for you. Please be sure to fill out today's survey. The anonymous results are then shared with all of our committees as well as with our board of directors. Remember, if you enjoyed today's forum and would like to support City Club, please consider becoming a member or live stream sponsor at cityclubco.org. City Club had previously announced that our September forum would be back in person at the River House. However, the recent COVID-19 pandemic mandate has caused us all to make difficult choices, and our choice is always with the health and safety of our community. Many organizations are canceling and postponing events, and the trend appears to be more of the same. Chances are you've had an in-person event cancel recently. I certainly know I have. In an abundance of caution and for the well-being of our community, we will not be proceeding with the in-person portion of September's forum. It was a difficult decision to make, but we know it is the right one for the health and safety of our volunteers, our guests, and the greater community. We look forward to the time we can meet again in person and hold physical space for conversations that are significant to our region. Our topic for September's live stream is equity through housing, which we touched on today. The inextricable link. An exploration of how housing policy has contributed to inequities and how you can be part of the solution is scheduled for September 16th. Thank you for watching. Please continue to cultivate conversation about issues that connect us all to build a stronger community. Thank you.
Thank you.